17 U.S.C. 107 federal law allows citizens to use copyrighted media for fair use. That is, criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody.
Shall forth your praise. Kuma, Yahweh, Wea Futsu Yabeka, Wea Usumi Feneka Yupeneka. Kuma, Yahweh, Wea Futsu Yabeka, Wea Nusumi Feneka Yupeneka. Kuma, Yahweh, Wea Futsu Yabeka. Arise of you, O Yahweh. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Let all of Yasharah, Yisrael, who love, worship, and praise Yahweh, give him thanks by saying Hallelujah.
Shalom, family, and welcome to Into All Truth. May the Ruach HaKodesh lead you into all truth and show you things to come. May the seed of Yah's word be planted in your heart to bring forth fruit of righteousness and to bring forth wisdom, understanding, and knowledge so that you can know what is the hope of your calling and the inheritance in the saints and what are your riches in the glory of Yahushua HaMashiach. In approximately 255 BC, we were presented with Hannibal, and these coins are supposed to represent him. And him going over the mountains of the moon with his elephants to try to defeat Rome. Rome in its germination stage before it was to prophetically destroy Israel. At the center of the earth is Shambhala, or Eden, or Mount Meru, or the Rubus Negro. Mount Moriah, Meru, Mora, the rock at the center of the earth by which everyone orients themselves. Called Shambhala, Avalon by the Celts. It's the top of the tree of life that is the earth that Psalms 48 talks about. Jerusalem is on the sides of the north, and this is one of Goya's images of Israel losing its kingdom. It's the world's axis or pillar, axis mundi. It is the golden cup that brings down all energy and power from heaven. By the Maya, the Masonics, the Bible, the Navajo, it's figured as a pyramid at the center of the earth. But to hear the Bible tell it, it's the land of Eden, and it's Jerusalem and Shem's land. They have this riddle of the Sphinx, and it's told many ways. One of them is, it's the question of what walks on all fours in the spring, on two legs in the summer, and on three legs in the winter. And it's supposed to be a baby crawling on all fours, and then a man walking, and then when he's old, he carries a cane. Some say the riddle of the Sphinx is actually supposed to refer to the order of the zodiac, telling by the signs of the heavens the beginning from the end. And every other religion and culture is supposed to have it wrong. Now, I don't believe in, nor do I endorse Egyptian spirituality, nor do I believe this is the original cosmology inscribed on the lands of the original Egyptian pyramid temples. But it has some relevance.
Now, the real riddle of the Sphinx was, where do you start on this circle? Which is the first of the signs of the zodiac? Now, In the Egyptian temple at Dendera, the zodiac on the ceiling has a sphinx painted between the sign of Leo and the sign of Virgo. Now, sphinx is from the Greek word sphingo, meaning to join, to bind together. Well, where you join the beginning and the end to make a complete circle, that was the riddle of the Sphinx. And they showed the head of a woman. So you began with Virgo. You proceeded to the body of the lion, and Leo was the last sign in the circle. You know who the lion is. Revelation 5, verse 5. And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof.
So we already went into the riddle of the Sphinx as it relates to the cosmology of the zodiac and how the whole story is written in the stars, starting with the virgin, the woman who is the seed and carries a branch of Israel, and then she is eventually redeemed by the lion at the end. And of course, everything is balanced out, and this is why Hamashiach, when he returns a second time, he'll come around the time of Sukkot, after September, and in the time of Libra and balance. And of course, after that is the time of Scorpio, when there will be another and final war where you have Black Orpheus warring with Hercules, who represents Satan and Esau. So we went into that in the last video, so please watch it for more detail. And now we're going to go into the other riddle of the Sphinx. So when you do review the zodiac, it actually, when you include all the stars and symbols behind, then it does tell the story of salvation. However, I think the Sphinx means something else. Normally we see these very grand images of the Sphinx seemingly portraying these perfect kind of proportions. However, when we actually take a look at it, the proportions aren't that great. The Sphinx is far too out of proportion. The head's way smaller than the body. And basically, the people who built the pyramids would probably never make such an error in proportion. So this explains why there is this riddle. Not only that, but because the head is more exposed and the body less exposed, the body would be more eroded. However, the head looks newer and smoother, and being more exposed, like I just said, it should look more worn.
What can we conclude about the dating of the pyramids and the Sphinx?
And all I can really say at this point, given the data I have, is that I think it has to be at least back to 5000 BC.
So there are various people who've looked at this question and come up with other solutions. In this Smithsonian documentary, Carl Reed says that Pharaoh Khafre reigned about 2500 BC, and that this was found inside the pyramid on the wall. Beside his name was this image of this lion, and he says that this is a female lion. Of course, this female lion seems to have a lot of girth around her neck, but nevertheless, that's the explanation given. He bases this on the idea that the oldest Sphinx in the world that he found in the oldest museum in Cairo. Ironically, it looks like a white woman when it's well known that Napoleon shot the nose off the Sphinx because it looked like a black person or a black woman.
The rain that poured down from the top in large quantities eroded furrows. But who is the Sphinx? Khafre or another king? A lion's head which would have been reworked to be transformed into Pharaoh's head? Whatever. Whatever.
Whatever? Dog? or lion, dog, or lion. I guess it's kind of like the difference between Esau and Jacob, or dogma and morals.
The question is, what does the head of the Sphinx look like? With 3D face reconstruction software, here is the face of the Sphinx reconstructed correctly for the first time. No comment. Since they were black, it makes sense to make a sculpture in their image. Like a painter who paints his god in his image, the Egyptians made the Sphinx to theirs. It is hard to imagine white Egyptians making a sculpture of their god or their king with a Negro profile.
You'll notice one thing. They all have broken noses. If one observes the statue and frescoes, the resemblance is striking. The nose, the big lips. Indeed, many statues have a broken nose because they had, as they say, a Negro noses.
But don't be fooled by this partial truth that they're giving you. Just partial. This Reed guy provides this photo of this lion from supposedly inside the pyramid, but he doesn't show where the name of the pharaoh was. So it's just always, suspicious. He uses the so-called oldest living sphinx, the Cairo Sphinx, which looks like a white woman, as an example of what used to be a lion. It has a woman's face on it, but you can see broken off ears and so on of a lion. And so he says that this leads to the conclusion that this is a female lion and that the Sphinx didn't actually have the face of a female. So he concludes that when you superimpose the female lion over this image of the Sphinx, or the so-called Sphinx, it must have been a female lion. However, it would more likely be a male lion, because when we look at this other Sphinx, which looks more like a black woman, we see again the image of a woman's face built into the head of a lion. But again, you look at the size of the mane of this lion, and you see that it is actually a male lion due to the lion's mane. And this is kind of what leads me to consider, perhaps, that this was the kingdom of Solomon. There's more to this, though, as well. Is this what the cobra headdress originally was? The Great Sphinx of Egypt, one of the world's most famous and enigmatic monuments, may be thousands of years older than archaeologists have believed, says Boston University geologist Robert Schoch, who did a novel analysis of its ancient stone. Schoch reaches his controversial conclusions by saying that the Sphinx shows signs of extensive weathering apparently caused by rainfall. Such weathering, which indicates a much wetter climate than exists today, is not found on the pyramids or in any other monuments on the Giza Plain, Schoch said. The redating of the Sphinx would make it by far the oldest monument in Egypt, millennia older than the pyramids that overtook it. So thousands of years, okay? It says the dramatic weathering we found on the body of the Sphinx is not seen on other structures in the immediate vicinity, Schoch said, even though many of them appear to have been cut or built from very similar or identical limestones and are supposed to have been built during the same time period. The Sphinx, a lion's body with a man's head, is primarily carved out of solid limestone bedrock with parts of its legs and outer body encased in limestone blocks. It stands 66 feet tall. Most Egyptologists say the Sphinx was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, known as Khephren, who built the second largest of the pyramids that stand behind the Sphinx. Khafra reigned from about 2500 BC, but Schoch believes the Sphinx was built between 5000 and 7000 BC, perhaps earlier. Now, I think that there's something about this Sphinx that actually tells a different story. And I don't think it was built between 5,000 and 7,000 BC. I think it was probably built around 3,000 BC, around the time of Emperor Solomon. I think this is King Solomon's Lion of Judah. This documentary on the pyramids, it talks about how they were truly constructed, and all of this knowledge was hidden from the Gentiles. But what it talks about is how it was made. And it's very curious because the cornerstone is very much emphasized, and the capstone. So you'll see in this documentary. I think the timeline is based upon the empires of David, probably Solomon. There are many reasons for this. Kefir is always a word used to describe black South Africans with E1B1A, or Peter, or the Hebrews. And one of these pyramids is named after the king Kefir. Kefir was one of the names of the Egyptian kings, so-called Egyptian. Also, there's the alignment of the stars, there's the way the pyramids are constructed, there's the timeline. They're saying it began about 2,000 years ago. I'm saying it was at the time of David, Solomon, and possibly Saul. And there's even more evidence, which we're going to go into. And there came forth on the writing as Shem's lot, the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself, and for his sons, and for the generations of eternity. From the middle of the mountain range of Rapha, from the mouth of the water, from the river of Tina, and his portion goes towards the west, through the midst of this river, and it extends till it reaches the water of the abyss, out of which this river goes forth and pours its waters into the sea Miat. And this river flows into the great sea, and all that is towards the north is Japheth's, and all that is towards the south belongs to Shem. And
the first quarter is called the east, because it is the first, and the second the south, because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend.
All that is towards the south belongs to Shem, and it extends till it reaches Karaso, and this is the bosom of the tongue which looks towards the south. And his portion extends along the great sea, and it extends in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue which looks towards the south, for this sea is named the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and it turns here towards the south, towards the mouth of the great sea on the shore of its waters, and it extends west to Afra. Wait, Ham's land is in the west? Afra is in the west? Family, did you hear that? And it extends to the west to Afra, and it extends to the west to Afra. This whole time I've been saying Ham's land is in the south, but it's in the west is Afra, the land of Ham, which is where South Central America are, and the west is, and which is where the largest pyramids in the world are. Study of Africa and Egypt was always called Oriental Studies because you oriented yourself to the center of the earth and the east. That was how you were oriented. The people now called Chinese or Asians or Canaanites. The Orient or Asaya was the land of Shem. The Chinese are Canaanites, not Asians. Isaiah is the land of Shem. And Africa is the land of Ham, and it's in the west. Just as you see in the King James Bible, the old one, S's are often written as F's. Here you see Asaya, Afaya, written with an S as F, in the land of Shem. And it extends till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon, and to the south of the waters of Gihon, to the banks of this river. And it extends towards the east till it reaches the Garden of Eden, to the south thereof, to the south, and to the east of the whole land of Eden, and the whole of the east. It turns to the east, and it proceeds till it reaches east of the mountain named Rapha, and it descends to the bank of the mouth of the river Tina. This portion came forth by lot for Shem and his sons, that they should possess it forever, unto his generations forevermore. And Noah rejoiced that this portion came forth for Shem and for his sons, and he remembered all that he had spoken with his mouth in prophecy. For he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and may the Lord dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of the Lord, and the Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as holy places facing each other. And he blessed the God of gods, who had put the word of the Lord in his mouth, and the Lord forevermore. And he knew that a blessed portion and a blessing had come to Shem and his sons unto the generations forever, the whole land of Eden, and the whole land of the Red Sea, and the whole land of the east, and India, and on the Red Sea, and the mountains thereof, and all the land of Bashan, and all the land of Lebanon, and the islands of Kaphtor, and all the mountains of Sanir and Amana, and the mountains of Ashur in the north, and all the land of Elam, Ashur, and Babel, and Suzanne and Media, and all the mountains of Ararat, and all the region by the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Asher towards the north, a blessed spacious land, and all that is in it is very good.
The pyramid was oriented east, relative to the sun. Orientation to the east automatically indicates all directions with the same precision. Indeed, the Egyptians did not care about the north. There was nothing in the north apart from primitive peoples. The south was sacred to them because it was where they came from, their roots. It is for this reason that cities were then built up the Nile, to be closer to their origins. The position of the sun is
Were Israelites or Shemites Ra worshippers? Is that what I'm saying? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What I'm getting to is who the originators of all of this are.
There is much debate over whether the pyramids are tombs, and whether the sarcophagi are intended for bodies. Many of the sarcophagi were empty when discovered. Almost all mummies, whether they are important figures in society or not, have been found in wooden coffins and not in granite sarcophagi.
I started looking at megalithic structures from an electromagnetic point of view, and sure enough, I began to find that there were these energies there present in measurable forces.
Strange things happen sometimes in sacred sites, and those are clues that the physics that we're taught in school is not everything.
We don't have the technology to build the pyramids now. Not even close. We're not the most evolved we've ever been. And that is one of the blinders that has stopped us from imagining that the ancients could have been far smarter than us.
It is well known that around these pyramids, these structures like this, are everywhere. Although when we look at the actual pyramids themselves, the very stones are broken down and disintegrated due to time. So there's no way that these many pillared structures with these fine impressions that are only centimeters and millimeters deep, implying technologies from the past, are actually original to the structures, and this is well known. The structures didn't seem to have things like columns, which are more of the world of Esau, or helicopters and spaceships.
Yet, in recent years, a 20-mile wall, 14 feet high, was installed around the enormous site of the Giza Plateau. There are about 100 armed guards patrolling the pyramids at night. Applications for investigative academic research, while entertained initially, are almost all routinely refused. Unlike in times past,
it seems like, as in the past, a new history is being once again imposed upon the original structures.
Another controversial object that Egyptologists merely deem impossible is the artifact commonly known as the Baghdad Battery, that generates a mild electrical charge. Similar ancient artifacts that match these objects have been found in Egypt. We can't say for certain, but it would appear that the Egyptians documented the existence of these artifacts as well. Recreations of these objects have been made and have successfully created electric current. Also noteworthy are strange representations of objects that resemble light bulbs, found in the crypts at Dendera. There was no natural light inside these underground crypts, but we see no soot from torches or oil lamps, the only lights we know the ancients used. We automatically assume that ancient structures are for ceremonial and religious purposes. Maybe the pyramids served a completely different function than previously imagined.
There's been lots of speculation about what the pyramids were actually built for. The most accepted notion is that they were tombs.
Much more complicated situation with the Great Pyramid than most people understand or most people believe, including a lot of Egyptologists who see it simply as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu.
That idea is childish for the following reason. I mean, it's obvious, we don't find mummies in the pyramids.
And of course, not finding a single mummy in any of the pyramids doesn't seem to deter the people who think that that's what they were for.
Yes, there's something that's sometimes referred to as a stone sarcophagus or coffer in it, a beautiful granite structure, but that doesn't prove definitively in my mind that it was ever actually used for a tomb. It may have been used for many other purposes.
Looking at the old riverbed, it seems clear that the Nile has migrated over time, and that it once flowed to the east of the pyramids. The ancient Egyptians built temples using sacred geometry corresponding to cavities in the human body. They had a profound belief in the significance of the stars and how the patterns of the constellations corresponded to our place in the cosmos. They understood large cycles of time, and they kept meticulous records of the motion of the stars and planets.
Let's see, coffer, kefir, sapphire, stone, tablets. I'm just hypothesizing, guys. I'm just hypothesizing.
What these were really intended to do, it wasn't so much for the selfish purpose of, for example, boosting up a few individuals. This actually had to do with a much larger global perspective. And that's effectively what the Great Pyramid was. It was basically a device, a generator for, if you will, broadcasting and transmitting throughout the planetary structure, a type of field which uplifted the entire humanity. For at least 1,000 years, this structure performed beautifully. My guess is that it probably did a lot to help offset the fall into the Dark Ages.
Pyramids were built not as a tomb. There are some pyramids built in a different construction, like the one in Saqqara, Step Pyramid, that is tomb.
Look at the obvious difference in construction between the Step Pyramid and the Great Pyramid. The difference in style of construction would logically indicate they were built in different time frames. The buildings we know to be tombs, like the Step Pyramid at Saqqara and the flat-topped mastabas, also at Saqqara, are very different from the smooth-sided pyramids at Giza and Dashur. Typically in Egypt, older constructions are built of larger stones. New constructions are built of smaller stones. Also, in archaeology, older structures are deeper. Newer structures are found closer to the surface. Every other tomb that has been found is highly decorated with names of the occupant. The inside of these pyramids seems solely functional and not decorative at all.
But if we stop altogether and say, okay, if they weren't tombs, what were they?
What are the biggest structures that modern man builds on the planet? The biggest, most awe-inspiring structures we create are hydroelectric dams. Why are we willing to invest such awe-inspiring amounts of labor and effort in constructing those? Because we know we're going to get a very valuable physical return in the form of electricity. And by comparison, I wonder if the ancient megalith builders weren't willing to invest such staggering amounts of resources by even smaller populations because they knew that they could get something very physical and worthwhile back from it.
People are fascinated by Egyptian monuments, and some report the energy is palpable at these sites. Is it possible to confirm this energy through scientific means?
What I've been finding in the last 20 years of research is a lot of experiments that have been done that show that there's a certain type of energy that does not exist in our current science. It's unknown with our current science. We call it subtle energy.
Well, this is a whole new trend of thought in looking at ancient structures, that maybe the ancients understood subtle energies.
So this appears to be a technology that may have existed in megalithic societies. You know, these societies that built things out of big stones.
It makes sense that you could motivate an entire population to invest so heavily in building these structures, I think. And I don't mean to say by any means that this is the only purpose of the megaliths, but I think it's pretty clear that it's at least one of the primary or one of the important purposes for building these structures.
We find megalithic sites everywhere around the world, and there's a tendency to make circles or certain types of formations.
Megalithic sites occur all over the world. Is their placement random, or does the location of these sites reveal yet another hidden layer of ancient knowledge?
One thing I've found looking at different megalithic structures over a few continents and numerous places around the world, overwhelmingly these places, the pyramids, the Stonehenges, etc. of the world, were placed on ground where an unusual type of geology naturally concentrates the regular daily natural electromagnetic fluctuations that occur everywhere on the Earth each day.
If you go into England, for example, the ley lines that cross England, the Michael line, which is hundreds of miles long that crosses England, that carries this energy along that line.
It will therefore generate electric currents in the land called telluric currents in the straight geological sense of that word. And those occur everywhere on the planet.
But we know that this ley energy, this subtle energy, passes along these lines.
There are certain special types of geology that will magnify those several-fold. And that's where we found the megalith builders preferred to put their monuments.
And typically where lines cross, where you get more than one line intersecting, temples were often built.
These are called conductivity discontinuities, which sounds highly technical, but it's merely the place where one area of ground that has a good ability to conduct electricity meets another area of ground that has a lesser ability to conduct these natural electric currents.
I think that the ley lines are simply a guide to correct and reverse Pangea back to its proper image and place.
It was illegal for a commoner to be buried on such a line. A king had to be buried on such a line. They put palaces there. There's a whole series of sacred sites that were always built on lines like this.
I want to say in this area about the location of temple. You have to have symbols appear on the ground. When it's seen, then this is the place where people naturally come to get more healthy energy from that spot. You know, energy pops from the earth.
And it appears as though they were attempting to control the flow of this energy and use it for their own purposes.
The key hours, unfortunately, are the pre-dawn hours. If you really want to study this, you've got to get up at 3 and get out there very fast. That's because the energy that is involved in these sites, that's really fueling most of it, originates with the daily changes in the Earth's geomagnetic field. It's strongest during the day, weakest at night. And in the hours leading up to dawn, the weaker field lines now come roaring back to closer to full strength very quick. It's the most dramatic time in terms of change of magnetic strength per hour. It's the most dramatic time of the day. And wherever you have a changing magnetic field occurring, you are generating electric current in anything present that will conduct electricity. It's a simple principle of physics known as induction, and it's a universal.
Normally, in everyday life, we don't ever see large concentrations of this energy. Normally, it'll show up at, let's say, at mountaintops, at sacred sites. You'll feel a certain calm, a certain peace. When you look back on how sacred sites were chosen and buildings like the pyramids were constructed, the suspicion arises that they understood quite a bit more about this stuff than we do, and they may have been using it in their engineering.
Then the megalith builders designed these structures and then built them in such a way as to further concentrate those energies. So they definitely seem to have known what they were doing.
Indeed, water weathering and precipitation induced, so it has to have been done in the distant past, and the question then is, how distant was that past?
It could take tens of thousands of years for the Nile to have migrated 8 miles. Can we use this evidence to redate these monuments?
When you look at geology, you can see that the riverbed has migrated all the way from the west, beyond 50 kilometers to the west. Then it passed across the plateau, and you can see that the ancient riverbed actually went right up to the pyramids, and the initiates could have stepped right off these barges up onto the causeways into the pyramids. Now, if you look, the Nile is a full 8 miles to the east, and it's the dividing point between Cairo and Giza. And so if we look at geological time, it would take several tens of thousands of years in order for the Nile to make that migration. We can compare that to places like Tiahuanaco in Bolivia that almost certainly was on the edge of Lake Titicaca, and now it's 50 miles away. So it changes the whole idea of how ancient these places could have been.
So it's factors like these that give more credence to reverse Pangea and the original placement of everything.
How many thousands of years does it take for a river to make this huge journey? The oases of El Khaga and Fayoum run parallel to the Nile today, but 100 kilometers west. It seems that the river migrated all the way from here to its current course. Evidence of ancient human settlements has been found in the area that is now desert, but once had water. At these locations are stone circles, indicating a knowledge of astronomy. What does it tell us about the distant past?
The Greek's letter of Orestes, when he went to go and visit the kingdom of Jerusalem, provides a lot of clues as to the nature of the land and water distribution in the empire of Jerusalem, and would probably provide more clues as to what was going on in the empire of the lion, the empire of Solomon. So I'm not saying Egypt's religion is our religion. I'm saying the land is the land of Israel, and it's a cover-up. That's the riddle of the Sphinx. For the country is well adapted not only for agriculture but also for commerce, and the city is rich in arts and lacks none of the merchandise which is brought across the sea. It possesses two suitable and commodious harbors at Ascalon, Joppa, and Gaza. It goes on to say that it produces everything in abundance. Since it is well watered in all directions and well protected from storms, the River Jordan, as it is called, which never runs dry through the land. Originally, the country contained not less than 60 million acres, though afterwards neighboring peoples made incursions against it, and 600,000 men were settled on farms upon it of 100 acres. The river, like the Nile, rises in harvest time and irrigates a large portion of the land near the district belonging to the people of the Ptolemies, pole mace, corn pole. It issues into another river, and this flows out into the sea. Other mountain torrents, as they are called, flow down into the plain and encompass parts about Gaza and the district about Ashdod.
We are not used to things built out of stone being high technology. It is clear that several different kinds of stone from a variety of sources were used to construct Egyptian monuments. Did the distinct qualities of the stones serve a special purpose?
What I do find fascinating is that the core of the pyramids, at least at Giza, are made out of one type of limestone. Now, it is the limestone that was closest, but it also happens to be the type that's called dolomite because it's got a high magnesium content. And because of that metal content, that kind of limestone conducts electricity pretty well. And then they chose to sheath the pyramid in the whiter Tura limestone, which, granted, it's whiter and it's prettier and all that, but it also has almost zero magnesium content. And therefore, it's a much poorer conductor of electricity. It's closer to a pure calcium carbonate, which is what all limestone is. And pure calcium carbonate conducts electricity much more poorly than dolomite does. It's interesting to me that those outer stones were the ones that they cut so precisely that all these thousands of years later you still can't get a razor blade between them. Because basically what we've got here is we've got a situation with a highly electrically conductive core of those pyramids wrapped in what is effectively a very effective insulator. Why the granite in the passageways, you know? And so, of course, I'm thinking from an electrical point of view and a physical point of view. Is there anything special about granite? And yeah, there is. Granite is slightly radioactive, and it will ionize or electrify the air. It releases radon gas, which is radioactive.
Granite is a transmission stone. It's not dead stone, it's alive.
So you have these sealed shafts with granite linings, and I wonder if it wasn't designed to keep an electrical charge present in those shafts. They were built exactly like, if you will, an insulated wire, only more so because you've got all the charge in the ground that's spread across the base, concentrated all the way up into this tiny spot at the top.
We find similarities in 3 different constructions. The one at Giza here, Valley Temple, and one at Abydos, and another one abroad in England, the Stonehenge. Same material being constructed with, and same way and same technique. But the construction there, it's built in addition to have the water, because it's water bed. It's a huge water bed, and it's still working, still producing water.
In Egypt, you do have a similar situation to England in that you have limestone aquifers under the monuments.
An aquifer is an underground layer of porous, water-bearing rock. Water flows through the aquifers as rainfall, or when rivers and lakes flood, the water drains into them.
And movement of water through limestone or chalk aquifers is known to produce electrical charge by 2 different processes that are self-reinforcing. And I've personally measured this for a week at a stretch at Silbury Hill in England, for example. Before and after thunderstorms, as the water is sinking into the ground, we measured the increase in ground current, the change in the magnetic field as that happened, etc. And in Egypt, you had the Nile crashing, dropping every year and then flooding again. And that movement of water up and down through the layers of limestone would generate electrical charge. Flowing water generates at least a mild electrical charge, which means it generates an electric current, which means it generates a magnetic field as well. So if you were looking to give an electrical charge, a little boost to, say, a mound or something like that, it makes a lot of sense to have it at a minimum running water. And in fact, at Tiwanaku on the south shore of Lake Titicaca, their biggest monument, the Akapana Pyramid, was terraced in such a way as to have the water come down in waterfalls that alternated outside the pyramid, inside the pyramid. But that kind of falling water generates enough electric charge that one of the common school physics experiments is you can, in your own sink at home, if you can divide the stream of water coming out of your faucet into 2 separate streams, you can take a little LED indicator light and put it between the streams, and it'll generate enough electricity that maybe every 20 seconds or so the light bulb will come on. And then the question is, did some of those layers of limestone run up the Giza plateau? And they did, and they did, come up to the surface underneath where some of the pyramids are located. The idea would be that it would be the rising and falling of the Nile that would produce this electric ground current by moving through the different layers of the limestone aquifer. And when there was a dip, say, in that supply, maybe that's when the ionized air in the granite shafts and galleries could help keep the process going, if you will. I tend to wonder if the electrified shafts might not have been able to act in a similar fashion to your car battery when you come to a stoplight. Normally, your battery is not being used when you're driving your car. The alternator provides all the juice. But when you stop and that alternator is turning very weakly, that's when you want the battery there to keep everything going so your engine doesn't cut So you've got this concentration of negative charge from the ground at the peak of the pyramid or mound, and a concentration of positive charge above it. And if those two become strong enough, you can start to get brush discharge, which would mean it would glow, like ball lightning, for example. It's a theory.
Why in the Great Pyramid is there no frescoes, there's nothing, no decorations at all? Now, some people have proposed the idea that the pyramids are actually energy machines. And so I liken this to the fact, like, you wouldn't put a decoration inside your oven.
I was talking with a woman who had spent some time in the Great Pyramid, and her comment was, it felt like I was in a machine. She said it was not like this, oh, it's a wonderful shrine. She said it felt very functional. In fact, she made a comment that I actually think is probably right on. She said, I felt as if I wouldn't have wanted to be in here when it was running.
Invisible, subtle energy occurs around us all the time and is measurable by science.
We had noticed a lot of people showing us photographs from megalithic sites that disproportionately often seem to have these balls of light in there, usually flash photos.
Orbs are often written off as dust or other particles in the air, but that does not change the fact that they seem to occur more often in particular places at particular times.
At Tikal, at the top of the most energetic pyramid that we found down there, we took a lot of flash photos during the course of our 8-hour stakeouts, which would run from roughly 3 a.m. till 11 a.m. And on the pyramids that were electrically dead, that had no juice, nothing going on, which were the big fancy ones, but the most recently built ones, we would take photos and find out eventually when they were developed, no orbs, no glowing balls of light. But on the oldest pyramid down there, where we did work and got all kinds of results, that was 1,200 years older than the big fancier ones. In that case, the photography we got back from our own simple flash cameras, they were literally choking the screen with these balls at the period at which the air was highest in electrical charge. And on the strongest day down there, I was recording electrical charge higher than I've recorded even in thunderstorms back home. We don't know what orbs are, but our personal guess is that they're balls of ionized or electrified air that will tend to hang together. A good analogy would be ball lightning, where it's simply so electrified that the molecules are excited enough to glow.
Other evidence shows that there is energy occurring naturally everywhere on the planet that our science knows about but seems to ignore. Nikola Tesla sought to provide the world with free wireless electricity for everybody on Earth. He discovered that electricity occurred naturally throughout the Earth's atmosphere and ground. The telluric currents in the ground that John Burke discussed, and the electricity present in the ionosphere in the atmosphere, which is ionized by the sun. He also created and developed ways to harness those energies.
Tesla, who teach Nikola Tesla to get to that power of electricity? And he didn't invent it, it's already there, but he know how to use it. And not only that, he did not take an advantage like Mr. Edison.
Tesla wanted to harness the natural energy that exists everywhere on Earth and make it free to the public. Edison endeavored to produce and distribute electricity by creating a regulated monopoly for profit.
He became rich and the people more light into their home. Yeah, so Nikola Tesla, he's the one think of how to use this energy.
Between 1901 and 1917, the Tesla Tower was built on Long Island as a wireless broadcasting system for telephone and electrical signals. Interestingly, it was constructed on an aquifer with descending passageways and tunnels beneath it. At the time, few understood how it worked. Tesla's funding was ultimately dropped by J.P. Morgan because Tesla wanted the wireless electricity to be free, and therefore J.P. Morgan couldn't make a profit. So even though Tesla's genius was seen by many, he was still driven into obscurity. The energy to create free wireless energy has always existed on our planet, and still exists today.
And it's not only energy on our planet, there are plenty. Rivers are flow by energy. Tsunami is energy. Frequencies are energy. If we have the electricity now, it's based on explosion energy. Now, the sound energy based on a technology different from the explosion energy, and it's known as implosion energy.
This energy was not the kind of energy that we have that pollutes. It was a completely passive energy that had no byproducts.
The energy we use today is generated by combustion and is non-renewable. It is called explosion energy and leaves exhaust and pollution.
Our system all over the planet today is based on the explosion energy. That's why the petrol is too expensive.
In contrast, implosion energy, like solar panels and wind power, is clean and renewable. We are beginning to realize that we need sustainable energy.
Implosion energy, very simple. All what you need is the beam of the sun on a running water. Not just running in a straight line, but in a zigzag. And that's, you find all the tunnels are in a zigzag form for such a purpose.
In addition to the limestone aquifers underneath the pyramids, there is evidence of a network of man-made tunnels.
As a boy, when I'm living in my house, which is a few 100 yards away from the nose of what we call the Sphynx Riddle, this was my playing yard, and I know tunnels. I walked in these tunnels, I swim in these tunnels, I crawl in these tunnels, and I know that this is one way of creating energy. Now this is cost nothing. I mean, all what you need is a beam of the sun reaching the running water underneath the tunnel, and you can see that there are many openers in each tunnel permit this sun beam reach the water. And when it does, then the energy is there. Energy is not just to run your car, or it's run the people, feed the people.
If the pyramid fields of the Band of Peace and the network of underground tunnels are still there, why don't they generate energy the way they used to?
In the condition of the pyramids now, stripped of those smooth insulating outer casings, it's going to leak electrical air about as well as a car radiator radiates heat. I mean, it's almost perfectly designed to weaken that, and yet still you get these reports of people like Siemens, who was one of the pioneers of electricity, and he was an Englishman. There's even a unit of electrical, I believe, resistance named after him called the Siemens. He was on top of the Great Pyramid, I think, during the 1880s, and they began to notice that when his Arab guides stood up and spread his fingers, they'd hear a ringing. And when he closed them, you wouldn't. And he stood up, and he could sense the literal electricity in the air. And on the spot, he improvised an instant Leyden jar, which is one of the earliest things they used to use to store electric charge. And he did it by opening a wine bottle, wetting some newspaper, wrapping the wet newspaper around the glass wine bottle, and holding the wine bottle up above his head until sparks started to issue from the wine bottle. And at that point, his Arab guides started accusing him of things like witchcraft. They got into a physical struggle, and he accidentally touched one of the guides with the charged wine bottle, and it knocked the man to the ground and unconscious for a short period, after which they took off down the pyramid. But there was, in other words, a professional scientist familiar with electricity in its rudimentary but accurate forms, sensing exactly that, even in this ruined condition that the pyramid's in today. Yeah.
If you come to the Egyptian Museum, there is an item over there known as the schist disc, found by Dr. Walter Emery, and he said, or he think that it could be a vase for a lotus flower. No.
The schist disc was found at Saqqara in a burial chamber that no one is allowed to visit. Other goods found in the chamber were simple ropes, pottery, and grains. The disc shows clear evidence of sophisticated technology in the way it was built. Look again at these quartz objects. Aside from their unique and amazing shapes, could they have had another purpose? Today, quartz crystal is used as the basis of all kinds of modern technology. It is most commonly used in crystal oscillators. Technology uses oscillating frequencies from tiny quartz crystals that vibrate at certain speeds, with a signature vibration for each device. AM/FM radios, CDs and DVDs, computer processors and Ethernet rely on quartz crystals. Could it be that the ancients were tapping into this technology and using it on a much larger scale, in a way we can only begin to imagine? Of course, we can't say for certain, but based on what we've seen, we can theorize. Energy can be created and manipulated in many ways. It is the lifeblood of a civilization, and therefore an important resource.
In Egypt, there are 67 constructions all along the Nile like sails. And for those who has the eye, they can tell from the shape of that construction. The straight form of angles, that is a pyramid or a construction for energy, a plant for energy. That's what we have.
A theory that's always struck me, that they were intended actually to somehow or another spiritualize a whole civilization. In other words, to provide a widespread, high level of energy that people needed because a descending age was upon them.
And I believe what the pyramid and other certain other structures were constructed for was to basically act as a kind of the equivalent of a street light. You know, if you're in a neighborhood that's maybe not the nicest neighborhood, and it gets dark at night, you like to have bright lights go on. And that's effectively what the Great Pyramid was. Now, these were not lights that illuminated it so that people could see where they were going. It was basically a device, a generator for, if you will, broadcasting and transmitting throughout the planetary structure, a type of field which uplifted the entire humanity.
And maybe those pyramids were built in some sense or another to stay the decline. Let's call them in some sense or another spiritual granaries designed to somehow store an emotional or spiritual or psychological or some sort of energy that was needed to keep people from becoming the total barbarians that they subsequently became.
We had the ability to basically prop up humanity for a while.
So we can see here how Israel in the time of Solomon was a light unto the nations, Revelation 21:23, and the city that has no need of sun or moon to sun on your night. For the day of glory of Yah will be your everlasting light, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Isaiah 9:2, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. That's also Matthew 4:16. So the Dark Ages truly began after Solomon's empire, and then truly after the fall of the temple in Israel in 70 AD. And you can see how those ley lines drew everything together over the entire earth, and why those Solomonic, they call them almanac, but Solomonic heads were even in Brazil and South and Central America, and Stonehenge. All of those were radiating that light and joining together the whole world in the empire of Solomon, the greatest empire in the world. And that's why you should be very dismissive when someone says America is the greatest empire ever. Selah. Let that sink in.
System. But what we saw was the street light eventually went out.
The original knowledge got lost, and the later builders were building them out of ego. They were monuments to the king, if you will, but they were no longer engines that could help feed their people.
Catastrophes around the world damaged, or if you will, decommissioned some of these sites. So some of them went offline, just like a power plant going offline.
I tend to wonder if the few people who knew the secrets to the energy connection with those pyramids didn't die off. If it was a thin chain of, for example, a shaman to his apprentice, and if the wrong people get killed at the right time, that chain is broken, that knowledge gets lost.
The construction of the pyramid started 4 years ago. We are at ground level. The mold for the first cornerstone is in place.
You'll hear from the indigenous Americans, as well as the 10 tribes, that there was a dispute after the death of King Solomon, that he had taxed the northern kingdom too much in work, in building for him. And he had built, actually, a kingdom for his Egyptian wife. And the northern kingdom were very well known to be brick makers. And the language used for brick making, it's actually not brick making with provender made of straw. The material used is actually stone, broken up stone, not straw. And so we'll go into the technique for making these bricks. And of course, this is what split the northern and southern kingdom, was that the southern kingdom was forcing the northern kingdom to make these bricks for buildings and structures like this. There are also multiple measurements used in the building of the temple that are used throughout Scripture. Now, before we get into this, I want you to understand that Abraham is the one who brought cosmology and science to the Egyptians. Abraham was a man of great sagacity. Therefore, he was a sage, and he began to have higher notions of virtues than others had. He determined to renew and change the opinion of all men, happened then to have concerning God. So we want to change everyone's opinions concerning Yah. For he was the first that ventured to publish this notion that there be but one God, the creator of the universe, and that as lo other gods, if they contributed anything to the happiness of men, that each of them afforded only according to his appointment and not by their own power. This, his opinion, was derived from the irregular phenomenon that were visible both at land and sea, as well as those that happened to be the sun and moon and all the heavenly bodies. Thus, said he, if these bodies had power of their own,
they would certainly take care of their own regular motions. But since they do not preserve such regularity, they make it plain that in so far as they cooperate to our advantage, they do it not of their own abilities, but as they are subservient to him that commands them, to whom alone we ought to justly to offer our honor and thanksgiving. Which with such doctrines the Chaldeans and other people of Mesopotamia raised a tumult against him, and he thought to leave that country at the command of his God, and settled in the land of Canaan. Okay, so it continues in chapter 7 that he was the forefather that went out of the land of the Chaldeans. It says, Bosaurus mentions that our father Abram, without naming him, in the 10th generation after the flood, there was among the Chaldeans a righteous and great and skillful in the celestial science. So a man righteous and great, skillful in the celestial sciences. Hecatzius does not more than barely mention him, for he composed and left behind him a book concerning him. And Nicholas of Damascus, in the 4th book of history, says thus, Abram reigned at Damascus, being a foreigner who came with an army out of the land above Babylon, called the Chaldeans. But after a long time, he got him up and removed from that country also. So this is the historical account of him living in and reigning and ruling in Damascus, which then becomes the first place of the salvation to the Gentiles, right? And there's a whole history with the true Iranian Medo-Persians and the mixing in with the Japheth with them. So he goes there next, and he's known to be righteous and skillful in celestial sciences. So now here is the discussion in chapter 8, where he shares the sciences with the Egyptians, because he has to go down there because there's a famine. So he again goes down from the top branch of the tree, which is the land of the Shem and Chaldeans, and down into the west, the southwest land of Ham. And Ham is also in Shem's land, right? So he goes down, and as we know, the Egyptian king takes his wife Sarah, and he has to let that happen. And then of course Yah intervenes and gives everyone diseases, and when the king, it says here, inquired of the priests how he might be freed from these calamities, they told him that this is his miserable condition derived from the wrath of God on account of his inclinations to abuse the stranger's wife. And then he, out of fear, asked Sariah who she was and who it was that she had brought along with her. And when he had found the truth, he excused himself to Abraham, that supposing the woman to be his sister and not his wife. He set his affections on her, etc., etc. So as a consequence of this, that what the king did was he also made him a large present in money and gave him leave to enter into conversation with the most learned among the Egyptians, from which conversation his virtue and his reputation became more conspicuous than it had been before. More conspicuous than it had been before. For whereas the Egyptians were formerly addicted to different customs and despised one another's sacred and accustomed rites, and were very angry with one another on that account, Abraham conferred to each of them and demonstrated that their reasonings were vain and devoid of truth. And he admired them in their conferences as a very wise man and with great sagacity or sage-like wisdom. But instead of trying to understand their reasoning, he tried to persuade other men also to assent to him. The scripture is very clear, family, that we're not to answer a fool according to their folly. So when people say, be open-minded to what I'm teaching before you teach me your stuff, no. He listened to them for a little bit, but he didn't bother. It says, do not understand evil. Do not study evil. He told them it was vanity. He didn't study it. He didn't try to understand it because it pollutes the mind. If it's confusion, it's confusion. Take the example from your forefather. You don't need to learn about Buddhism and Muslim faith and all those other things to have a good argument. Okay, you just have to understand the truth. Instead of trying to understand their reasoning, he tried to persuade other men also to assent to him. He communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. He communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abraham came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning. And we see, of course, also this continued in Daniel among the Babylonians in all matters of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them, and he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were all in all his realms. So that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. Okay? Continuing in this tradition of true science. So when everyone's talking about the Egyptians were first in science and all that Babylonian stuff, it's just not true. Israel is the former of all things. Jacob is the former of all things. Okay? For that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt, and from thence to the Greeks also. So let's see how that works in this documentary.
We are at ground level. The mold for the first cornerstone is in place.
Cornerstone, a key Hebraic concept.
Arranged in Indian file, in African file, the workers pass the buckets one after the other, from the mixing tank to the mold. They pour the white concrete, and about 30 minutes later the mold is filled. Today we call this process formwork construction.
Remember, they did have a Christ concept in Egypt. The plagiarized term Christ originates from the Kemetic term Christ or Karast. Karast was the name of the sarcophagus or coffin that Kemetu used as an immortal house to bury the deceased. In Christianity, the concept of Christ is of a single person who is considered God incarnate. In Kemet, everyone acquired a Karast. A Karast was the bank vault to protect the body from deterioration and to represent the body's presence after death. And so remember, Ha-Satan was there when the cornerstone of the earth was established, so he knew Yahusha was coming. The capstone, a key Hebraic concept. Even the Egyptians actually knew. So they knew a capstone and a cornerstone were coming. And so they had a Christian Jesus of their own, and that's why the beliefs of the Hebrews is not called Christianity. Yahusha is called Hamashiach, and his name is Yahusha, not Christ.
At 140 meters, the teams from east and west stop advancing and start the descent. They pour the apothem facing stone on the way down. Only teams from the south and north continue until the end. The architect Hemiunu and Khufu go up symbolically to unveil the Pyramidion. The Pyramidion is revealed. The crowd shouts with joy. 20 years of hard work for their king is coming to an end.
The Hebraic measures, how they were established, not by Egyptian contemplation.
This unit of measurement would have to have a fixed length in time, if possible, never change. They had the idea to measure water. Yes, fresh water from the Nile. They measured one drop and then another. They were all the same size. From the lower Nile to the upper Nile, the drops were the same size. They noticed that the size of the water drop did not change year after year. It's wonderful. The Egyptians found a unique unit. The diameter of the drop of water on a waterproof surface, like granite or alabaster, is constant. It measures 1 centimeter. They named this small unit the royal finger. 10 drops of water or 10 royal fingers equals 1 royal hand. 100 drops of water, so 100 royal fingers or 10 royal hands, equals 1 royal leg. Centuries later, these discoveries were taken out of secret coffers and renamed. The royal finger was called the centimeter, the royal hand the decimeter, and the royal leg the meter. They were presented as recent discoveries, and the French appropriated them, made in France. The diameter of the drop of fresh water measures what is now called 1 centimeter. Water is a universal constant. The size of the drop of fresh water will never change for thousands and millions of years.
The mitri, or meter, is what is worn on the head of the priests, the measure of the mind and the head. The length of a man's hand is a scripture frequently used to measure things. And all of these measures are used throughout Scripture. The meter, or mitre. And I said, let them set a fair mitre upon his head. So they set a fair mitre, or meter, upon his head, and clothed him with garments, and the angel of Yahuwah stood by. That's when Joshua meets the angel of Yahuwah. And he put the mitre, Levites, and they put the mitre upon his head. Also the mitre, even upon his forehead, did he put the golden plate, the holy crown, as Yahuwah commanded Moses. Exodus 39, and a mitre of fine linen, and goodly bonnets of fine linen, and linen breeches of fine twined linen. So this is what the priests are wearing. And he shall put a holy linen coat, and he shall have linen breeches upon his flesh, and he shall gird with a linen girdle, and with a linen mitre shall he be attired. And these are the holy garments, therefore he shall wash with water, and so put them on. Now, the word for mitre in the best of these is mitznapath, the official turban of a king, or diadem of, or mitre. So the turban of a priest, and you can imagine that it's long and it's wrapped. It's either a turban, it's another word for it is a cis, or plate, because 6 is the number of man. Cis means 6. Burnished glass, gleaming, plate, wing, all of these things implying crowns and angels. Something gold colored, as with oil, precious metal. And so once again, whether it's a turban or this headband, it's always very long, maybe a meter long, and then wrapped about the head for raiment. A window shalt thou make to the ark, so this is at the time of Noah, in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. So this is before the Egyptian Empire, okay? Also in Ezekiel, it says, and behold, a wall outside the house and round about, in the man's hand a measuring reed of 6 cubits long by cubit, and a hand breadth. So he measured the breadth of the building 1 reed. Now here in Ezekiel, in these various verses, including Revelation, it says the length of a reed is given as 6 cubits, each being a cubit and a palm, or hand's breadths.
They named this small unit the royal finger. 10 drops of water or 10 royal fingers equals 1 royal hand. 100 drops of water, so 100 royal fingers or 10 royal hands, equals 1 royal leg. Centuries later, these discoveries were taken out of secret coffers and renamed. The royal finger was called the centimeter, the royal hand the decimeter, and the royal leg the meter. They were presented as recent discoveries, and the French appropriated them, made in France. The diameter of the drop of fresh water measures what is now called 1 centimeter. Water is a universal constant. The size of the drop of fresh water will never change for thousands and millions of years. Yes, the universal unit, the meter, was not invented in 1780, but it was discovered by the Egyptians millennia ago. The meter is a universal unit because it is measured on water. Water is the only material that is stable. All other materials or objects are difficult to measure, or else they vary over time. The architecture of the entire universe is constructed with this unit. Now that the Egyptians had discovered the meter, they could trace the plots without a problem. With the meter, they measured everything and recorded everything. They took a disc with the diameter of a royal leg and wrapped a string around it. They unrolled the string and measured it. The parameter of the disc was 3 royal legs and 14 royal fingers, or 314 royal fingers. A disc with a diameter of 10 unrolled corresponded to 31 units and 4 subunits. A disc with a diameter of 1 corresponded to 3 units and to 14 subunits. One number stood out each time: 314, 31.4, 3.14. They thought this number was important. This figure is pi, 3.14. Egyptians knew pi with precision long before Archimedes. From this experience, they also deduced the decimal system. They cut the disc into 6, measured it on the royal leg, the meter.
Here 6, or CC, is the number of man, and it's the number of gates that the sun and the moon move through. So they cut the sphere into 6 and then measured it with 1 exact meter across this circle they cut into 6.
They got the number 52 centimeters and 36 subunits, millimeters. They wrote it down and thought this was important. During their observations, they noted that the volume of a sphere represents 52.36% the volume of a cube. Whenever the volume of the cube and the sphere increases proportionally, this number does not vary. In so doing, they discovered one of the most important universal constants, kept secret, the number 52.36. Twice, in volumes and forms, this number is everywhere. They conclude that this number is sacred. The Egyptians discovered the number 52.36, which is a universal constant like pi and phi. The number 52.36 is an important universal constant, more than pi and the golden ratio, since it connects 2D space with that of 3D.
Now keep in mind, Yah said, "Heaven is my throne room and the earth is my footstool." There are 4 corners to the earth, yet it is domed like a footstool, so it's circle squared. This is now sphere cubed.
Now, how does one incorporate this sacred number? They put a stick on the royal leg, the meter, which is divided into 100 units. They cut the stick so that it made 52 royal fingers and 36 subunits. The royal cubit was born. The royal cubit equals 52.36 drops of water, or 52.36 centimeters. From then on, all of Egypt would have as a standard a universal constant, the royal cubit. It is for this reason that we find the meter everywhere in the Great Pyramid, since the royal cubit is graduated on the meter. Any other unit, the yard, the inch, the mile, the nautical mile, the pica, the foot, are all arbitrary or graduated on the meter. Empirically, the Egyptians also discovered the golden ratio. They reasoned thus, since the gods use these sacred figures everywhere in nature, in order to remain connected to nature ourselves, We must integrate them into our buildings to do as the gods do. Simple reasoning, but genius. Sacred principles. The Egyptians will integrate the universal constants everywhere. Pi, the golden ratio, the royal cubit, the whole panoply of sacred geometry with the meter. The Egyptians knew the Fibonacci sequence in the golden number thousands of years before him and called it the addition sequence.
Don't forget, this is all of the teachings and knowledge that Abraham got from Noah and Shem. And these are the people, and I believe his people, in the land of so-called Egypt, or Iafra, constructing buildings and structures based on what the forefather Abraham had taught them. When we examine the symbol for house, Bayit, it is this golden ratio. So this is the family, the tent, the house, the earth. This is the code for everything. And this is why Hebrew is a pictographic language, because it speaks practically to reality. And note, the word ratio has the word resh in it, which is the head, the leader, the first, the son. Israel is my firstborn son. This is the resh.
Temple of Khafre, the Temple of Edfu, Akhenaten's palaces are built with the golden rectangle.
So you may be asking, what does the riddle of the Sphinx have to do with Mercator and the man in the map of the world? Well, it's all part of the riddle. You know, I'm always talking about reverse Pangea. How when you reverse Pangea, Africa is moved back up into the center of the earth. And there's even scripture that confirms that Israel was originally east of Eden, which would be at the center of the earth, but Yah now descends in the south often, or he will finally descend in the south.
And the first quarter is called the east, because it is the first. And the second the south, because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend.
So what does all of this have to do with Mercator? Well, we've talked about the circle and the square of the earth, and those things in volume. And the earth, which is the house, and the rosh, or the resh, which is also the head of the earth, and the beginning of all things, including the golden ratio.
In 1970, a project to explore the shafts of the pyramid with robots was born. It's the Jedi project. It's the Jedi project.
So I think we all know that Jedi means Yehudi.
The greatest architect in the history of humanity is Hemiunu, the one who designed the Khufu pyramid, with less than 1% error. The pyramids are not aligned with the 3 stars in the middle of the constellation of Orion, as argued by Boval. The Alnitak star falls 150 meters outside the Menkaure pyramid. 150 meters of error is huge and unlikely compared to the accuracy of the alignment of the pyramids to 1 centimeter. The 3 pyramids are aligned with the Betelgeuse stars, Alnilam and Rigel. The correlation is perfect. We see a form of egocentrism in Khafre, who wanted to outdo his father. He built his pyramid as large as that of his father. He positioned it so that it corresponds with the heart of the Orion, the star Alnilam, obliging his son Menkaure to line up with the Rigel. Khafre also built the main roadway in alignment with the night rising of Alnilam.
Now keep in mind, this whole constellation is called Orion, or meaning light, ion meaning ages or heaven, or world, Zodiac, now I don't mean astrology, I mean constellations, can also be pronounced Zadok, which means righteousness. Or can also mean gold, an eon, age, or world, golden age.
Golden ages are times of enlightenment, when civilizations reach high points in architecture, spirituality, and benevolence.
And Israel called this constellation Kesea, or strong one or hero. And you'll notice in some of the images I showed, it looks like a cup, an hourglass, okay? And then the principal star in it is Betelgeuse, which is like Bethel, house of bread, juice. House of bread, Yahudim, juice, or in Hebrew it means coming of the branch. Coming of the branch. You've heard of the man in the moon. Clearly, it's a Babylonian concept with the right eye poked out. The man in the moon. But it actually comes from the word MUNDI also. The man in the MUNDI. MUNDI means earth in French. In recent times, we've been presented with the coin of Hannibal, the ruler in North Africa who ruled Carthage with the famous ships, who also supposedly went over the mountains with elephants to try and conquer Rome in its germination stage, just when it was beginning. And for some reason he turned back and he didn't get the victory. And he lost an eye. So this is the story we're given behind these coins. However, there just might be another story that can finally be unlocked by Mercator's map. Take a look at this. So is this Hannibal's elephant? Or is this Israel's earth? That is the question. This coin is the true shape of the earth, and this is Hannibal's elephants going over the mountains? Or is it showing that he is the ruler of the earth, because the elephant often symbolizes the earth and the pillars of the four corners of the earth? Is he the ruler of the pillars of the earth? Could this be young King David and the face of the earth? Could this be the image of Yah's face in the earth? Could this be the face of the earth? What exactly did Hamashiach mean when he held out a coin and said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto Yah what is Yah's"? If this is the face of the ruler of the earth, what exactly did he mean in light of the fact that he was rejected by Israel? What earth could have been handed over at that time to its rightful owners? Yah said of Israel, "No longer will you call me Baali, but Ishi," which means eye or iris or husband. He also said, "You are the apple of my eye." When you love someone, you look longingly at their image. Isaiah, "He shall surely violently turn and toss thee like a ball into a large country, and there shalt thou die, and there the chariots of thy glory shall be the shame of Yahuwah's house." So many of the navigators were black Moors who brought the Europeans and the Edomites to the New World. We see the Inquisition beginning. We see the transatlantic slave trade beginning. We see Mercator going to the center of the earth to map the pole. We see John Dee and the physician of Queen Elizabeth claiming that the center of the earth is the magnetic point, not the North Pole. and much more at this particular point in time, exactly like, because of course Mercator looks mixed race, as does it appear John Dee and others of this time, who I believe are Edomites. So between 1492 and 1575, and in the 1600s, in comes round earth, all at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. And when we look at Mercator, we see that he looks very much like King Charles V, the Edomite who gave birth to Philip, King Philip of Spain, who was the son of Isabella, who sent out Columbus to discover America with these same navigators. And then we see him ruling over the Inquisition and the transatlantic slave trade. And how much does Mercator, West Indian surveyor John Edward Quinlan's The Earth a Plain, published in 1906, is more evidence of what the Hebrews knew. This is the only ball or sphere mentioned in all of Scripture. Isaiah, he shall surely violently turn and toss thee like a ball into a large country, and there shalt thou die, and there the chariots of thy glory shall be the shame of Yahuwah's house. 2 Esdras 6:1 says, He said to me at the beginning of the circle of the earth, before the portals of the world were in place, and before the assembled winds blew, is the word kug, which means compass. And Jerusalem will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations with perplexity until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. We'll see how even King James family dinner photos conveyed who owned the earth, these whitewashed images. And we will discuss Aristotle and him trying to get as many crumbs as he could from the Egyptians, and Copernicus and him working with the Catholic Church to build this theory of a round earth, finally graduating to Galileo in the 1600s and his coronation by the Spanish Inquisition, or his faux Inquisition, when he introduced the concept of a ball earth formally. And of course, we'll compare the Hebrews Inquisition to this stunning, beautiful image of the coronation of Galileo. This does not look like an Inquisition. The book of Enoch says many of the chief stars will transgress their order and people will fall down and worship them. People show error and take them to be gods and worship them, and evil shall be multiplied on the earth, and punishment shall come upon them. When you've made a solar system of 12 planets rotating around the sun, your heavenly view of the world, are you not making that your God? Are you not making it the ordering principle of your literal, physical, natural world and universe? The question asked by Yah when Adam knew he was naked, who told you that, has to be asked when we hear common sayings. And Aristotle began to cast a spell with a common saying from years ago that we still use today, as our people are under a state of hypnosis. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. It's like he tried to hypnotize all of the surveyors and navigators of the black known Hebrew world. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And it is the mantra of the so-called educated. When Yah tells us that my people perish for lack of knowledge, knowledge is the sign of the Resh, who is Hamashiach, the fist-like symbol that black power holds up to remember who they are, even in their deep sleep of the more you think you know, the more you realize you don't know. Wise men have knowledge, says Job. Hear my words, O ye wise men, and give ear unto me, ye that have knowledge. Always consider the source. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, and because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will reject you and your children. Be still and know that I am Yah. Learn not the ways of the Gentiles. Could this be young King David in the face of the earth? When Yahuwah handed that coin with Caesar's head on it over and said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's," was he handing over the whole earth to the image of Caesar and the upside down church? When we look at this picture of Mercator, who drew maps of the world as a plane and flat, we see in this image it's a sphere. The hand of Mercator looks like a man, headless, walking away with the mantle of the earth as a ruffle about his shoulders, or a clown or a fool. And he holds his hand in the upside down peace sign. The peace sign is supposed to mean the tree of life. And the upside down peace sign is supposed to mean death to the tree of life. And it means to declare war through the upside down church. The conclusion of the matter? Isaiah 1 says, "The ox knows his owner and the ass his master's crib, yet Yasharel does not know. My people do not consider. A sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers." Reading down to 7, "Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers. Except Yahuwah Sabaoth had left unto us a very remnant, we should have been as Sodom, and we should have been like unto Gomorrah." At that time, Yahuwah said, "When you spread forth your hands, I will hide my face from you. When you make your prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. How is the faithful city become a harlot? It was full of judgment, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers." And it shall come to pass in chapter 2, in the last days, that the mountain of Yahuwah's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. That hasn't happened yet, because Israel has not yet returned in the second Exodus. But that is the conclusion of the matter and the promise. Fear Yah, keep his commandments. Wash yourself clean, make yourself clean, put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, and plead for the widow. Come now, let us reason together, says Yahuwah. Though your sins be scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If you be willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. But if ye refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured with the sword, for the mouth of Yahuwah has spoken it. Shalom. Yah bless you. So family, please go to livelightwell.com to get Chaya Eat Life and Fast, and to get the Hebrew Moed appointed times calendar, so you can understand the times and the signs in the heavens according to appointed times and line up with the blessings coming from Yahuwah. And you just go to livelightwell.com to get this appointed times calendar. Family, may Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift the light his countenance, and give you peace. Shalom. Like, subscribe, and share.